Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Luis Fernandez. Today we'll be hearing from WRAL's Gerald Owens and Scott Mason about some upcoming Tar Heel Traveler stories. Take a listen.
All right, sitting down with Scott Mason again, talking about some of the interesting stories you have coming up on Tar Heel Traveler. This one's about the next one coming up. We're going to talk about is about a tree.
Yeah,
it's not just any tree.
You know, you would think a tree is just a tree; it's a static thing, and yet it's got personality and it's got a story. It is the world's oldest longleaf pine tree, and it's outside in the woods, outside the Weymouth Center in Southern Pines, which is near Pinehurst.
Yeah,
and that's a beautiful area. It's called the Weymouth Woods Sandhills Nature Preserve. It was the first nature preserve in the state park system in the whole state. But then you've got this tree. It is 478 years old, almost 500 years old. Looks just like a tree. I mean, it's impressive. It's towering. I don't know how high it is, but it's up there. And it has stood all these years. It's in the woods, and people know about it. And that nature preserve has these walking trails, and people are all the time walking the trails, and they're stopping and taking pictures of the tree.
Now, this is probably a dumb question. Are there needles longer in this tree than the younger trees?
It's interesting that you ask that. I think they're the standard size tree, but you know there are no lower limbs on this tree. And that's interesting. It's almost like the tree has a mind of its own. The reason it doesn't have any lower limbs is it sheds the limbs so that fire won't get to those lower limbs and climb to the top. The tree knows that. It knows about fire. And then it has this really deep root system to guard against hurricane winds. And then it has sap inside the tree to guard against fungus and bugs. So it's got all these guards to help it survive. And the park superintendent who we interviewed, that's what he talked about. He said this tree is a survivor, and longleaf pines are a survivor. And, you know, longleaf pine trees have a huge history in North Carolina.
Right.
Do you know that story?
A little bit. I know that we have the order of the longleaf pine, but not necessarily the history behind the significance of the tree.
Well, you know, people think, gosh, tobacco is what built North Carolina. And in a way, of course, it did. But longleaf pines did as well. Because back, I guess, in the 1700s, England, you know, had these ships. And they would buy... Okay, so the longleaf pine tree has sap. You take the sap out and you make tar, pitch, and turpentine. Well, the tar and pitch we sold to England, and they would use it on the wooden hulls so that the hulls wouldn't leak, you know, and they'd even put it on the sails. So that was a huge asset for these ships. In fact, we sold it to ships all over the world. And so we had this huge industry. And that's how North Carolina got its money. Now, over time, all those longleaf pine trees, many of them were harvested just to build buildings and homes. You know, there used to be millions of acres of longleaf pine trees from North Carolina to Texas, and they were virtually wiped out. So they have come back in recent years, but still they're not very plentiful. And that story ties in to this place in Southern Pines with the oldest longleaf pine tree. Back in the early 1900s, this man named James Boyd, he had a lot of England roots. He and his daughter came to Southern Pines, and they're walking through, and before they got to Southern Pines, well, they saw, I mean, it was just sand hills. All the trees were gone. Well, then they get to this little pocket in Southern Pines, and there are these longleaf pine trees. And the daughter clutches her dad and says, "Dad, please save these pine trees." Well, the man, James Boyd, he thought the area reminded him of Weymouth, England. And so that's why today it's called Weymouth Woods. And he made it his mission to save the longleaf pine trees. And then, as an aside, James Boyd's grandson became a very famous author, built the home that is now there on site that also houses the Literary Hall of Fame. There are all these layers to this story.
Right.
That's the thing about the Tar Heel Traveler stories. There's one layer, and then there's another, and then there's another.
It's another history lesson from
That's
the Tar
right.
Heel Traveler.
And one other thing about the world's oldest longleaf pine trees, 478 years old, and they have a birthday party for it every year. Usually,
what does the tree get?
The tree gets
Water?
nothing. Tree gets a salute, but it's called the Party for the Pine, and it's usually held in the spring. In fact, it was just held last month.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
It's so interesting, and again, you think, oh, it's a tree, it doesn't move, but in a way, maybe it does think.
Yeah,
but
it's smart.
but there's a story there.
Let's talk about another one. You've got this is a story about human nature surprising us. You have a successful couple who takes a right turn in life.
Oh yeah, okay. So this Robert and Carol Smith, they live in the Raleigh area. And Robert actually had a really interesting career. He worked for NC State, and he built this scientific lab equipment, and the things he built, went into space. But then he retired, and he said, okay, I'm going to go fishing. I love to fish. And his wife is actually a court reporter. Well, she kind of wanted to do something else, too. So they came up with this idea, hey, let's take bicycle spokes and make jewelry out of them. Why? You're thinking, what? Well, they had gotten the idea. I think they had seen someone in another state do this. So they took this bicycle spoke and they bent it, and then they put these little embellishments on them. Like they have a little dog's paw that's silver and a starfish. And they were like, okay, they're working out of their garage. We'll see what happens. So they made 30 of them. They sold just like that. They think, well, maybe we're on to something. So that's what they do full time. They make this jewelry out of bicycle spokes, and they also make rings out of silver spoons. And they flatten them, and then they bend them. And, of course, the spoon has all this elaborate design on the handle, the handle of a silver spoon. And so these rings have these really cool designs on them. And then they started making bookmarks, silver bookmarks, and putting little messages on the flat end of the bookmark, like booked for the weekend, I think is one of them. And then they spread from there. Then they started making ornaments out of old tobacco sticks. Tobacco sticks are what you tie the tobacco leaves and then hang them on the stick. Right. Well, then people would have these tobacco sticks laying around. Well, they took the sticks and made ornaments out of them. So they built this amazing little business, and it's low key. They sell online, and they go to shops, or they go to shows and festivals, and it's almost given them a new purpose in life. And that's the thing. All this silver, your grandma's silver that nobody wants anymore. Right. Well, that's been repurposed.
Can people give them silver to have them make jewelry, or do they just have the silver that they have and make it that way?
Well, that's the good question. They hunt for the silver, so they're continually going to antique shops and thrift stores. But they'll say, they'll set up a booth, and time and again, people will come in and say, I've got all this silver. My kids don't want it. What do I do with it? And granted, it's usually not silver, sterling silver. It's usually silver plated, right? Which is a lot less expensive. And so we'll take the silver. But it's kind of a neat idea how you recycle something. In fact, they're called the upcycled spokesman. And taking bicycle spokes and refashioning them, that's what makes the Tar Heel Traveler so interesting all the time, is you meet these people and I really get inspired because they're inspired.
So we have pine needles and bicycle spokes from the Tar Heel Traveler.
Runs the gamut, I tell you. Every week is a different story.
What's not to love?
Yeah.
All right, Scott, thanks.
Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you to Gerald and Scott for that conversation. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. For more news from WRAL, head over to our YouTube page. Be sure to like and subscribe and sign up for notifications. You can also sign up for the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email of Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.